I'm a registered investment advisor. My job in life is to make sure my retired clients don't run out of money before they die, okay? So I understand something about finance. I also understand something about the more mature citizens of our community. And I am here to help you comprehend what really isn't that complicated. But unfortunately, if you have a Teflon brain, you may not get it all. And it's not easy sometimes. If you're not into math or you don't do finance, it may seem like, oh my gosh, it's over my head. Now, there is a problem. The video we've got here isn't as good as I had hoped it'd be. That's why we're doing the handouts. But I've got a little device here. It's called a pointer. And I'm going to point. Now, some of the things that I'm going to talk about, you're going to want to make some notes. So you ought to get a pen or a pencil out and make some notes as we go along. If you don't have one and your neighbor needs one, sure. Okay, to begin with, the nice thing is that Steve Baird, does everybody know who Steve Baird is? Yeah. Okay. He is one heck of a nice guy, and he knows stuff more than I can comprehend sometimes. He wrote a narrative on what I'm going to now explain to you. So if you go home and you feel like you don't get it, oh, I'm doing this wrong already, aren't I, Dick? Okay, I'll stand still. Sorry, I lost my mind. I do that. I'm over almost 70, so I have a problem. He basically wrote out here what I'm going to talk to you about on the back, but I'm going to go over the numbers. Now, I'm not expecting you to be able to read them on the screen. That's why I'm giving you the handout. But you got to follow along. And I'm going to ask you to make some notes on it so that you can go home and then read the back and look at the front and comprehend what we're talking about. Are you with me? Okay. If you will move closer to the center, you'll be able to see this easier. We have lots of seats in the center. Pretend like this is a church. And those that are in the back row, they go to hell. And the ones in the front row, they go to heaven. Okay? So if you can move in, the closer you're to the center and closer you are to the front, it'll just be easier. Even though you can't read these numbers, it'll be easier for you to comprehend. Okay, now let's get started. There are only five. How many people have five? They know five? 5 sources of revenue for every county in the state of California. Actually, it's the same 5 sources for every county in the United States of America if the state has a sales tax and an income tax. So like some states don't have those. So they wouldn't have 5 sources, they might have 3. But California has 5 sources. If you look at the back page, or if you look at the front, and over here to the right, you'll see some columns that have yellow heading. There's property tax. Everybody know what property tax is? Okay. And we have state income tax, federal income tax, sales tax, and fuel or gas tax. You all know about those? Any question about one of those? Okay, now, you'll notice that there are some numbers under each column adjacent to the names of the states or the counties. So if you want to look at Shasta County, you can see how much. What Steve Baird did was he went out and found on the websites, the government websites, both the state and the federal websites, the source information, and then he compiled it in the spreadsheet. The guy is brilliant. So you don't have to know what he knows. You just have to be able to read what he wrote, okay? This is not rocket science yet. Now, property tax in the state of California is about 1%. We heard about that a couple years ago. It's called Jarvis-Gann. 1% of whatever your property value is your property tax. State of California now is allocating to counties roughly around 60%. State of Jefferson, if you look on your page, it says 100%. Is 100% better than 60%? This is not complicated, folks. It's more revenue for the county. The next one is the state income tax. You'll notice at the top of the column, there's a number that says 101, 1.01. If you know how to use spreadsheets, you can put a number there, and it'll go to a table, and the table will take every county and then put the number for that county in that space, in that little cell. He put 101. The average tax rate is roughly about 3.8%. It's average. But because he wanted to be more precise, what is reported in the state of California by every county, because they collect income tax from us, and they can tabulate it because they can look at our address. This isn't complicated. That's what the total amount is. That's how much you all paid in Shasta County and the rest of the other 21 counties that are in the state of Jefferson. That's the sum. The next column is the federal government column. Now, in the old days with this column, we used to have a number called 88%. Now you'll see it's 140. Why is it at 140? Because there are 5 states in the country, California is one, that make so much money to the federal government that they only paid us, usually today they're only giving back about 88% of the federal income tax that you guys pay. Only 88%. But because we're going to be a new state, and we're going to be a small state, the average of what those states get back from the federal government is 140%. Because those other 5 states, like New Jersey and New York and Florida and California and so forth, they make so much revenue for the government that they can take it and spread it out with the other states. So that's why the number is 140%. Okay, are you following this? All right. There's a sales tax. We're sharing about 33% with the counties. That's what we'll have available. And then finally, we have the gas tax, about 50%. The gas tax is kind of screwy because it's just screwy. If I had to explain it to you, everybody go to sleep. So we won't talk about that in detail. But we get about 50% from the state of California. Now, if you take this column and 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 add them together, you get this column. So if you have a pen or pencil, put at the top of this column a plus sign. That's something that looks like this. Is this complicated yet? Okay, it's very straightforward, just a plus sign. Now, it's very interesting that if you'll now take your pen and pencil and draw a line from the top of this column all the way over to the top of this column, those numbers are the same. Are you with me so far? Anybody lost yet? Okay, now, at the top of this column, I want you to put a plus sign. And at the top of this column, I want you to put a minus sign. And at the top of this column, I want you to put a minus sign. And at the top of this column, I want you to put an equal sign. So, if you take the first column, which is plus, and you subtract the next 2 columns, you get what's left over. Is this complicated? I learned that in 4th grade. Now I'm better at algebra, but math is okay too. You with me so far? So you take the plus, the 2 minuses, subtract them from the plus, and you end up with the equals. Is that clear? Anybody not follow this so far? Don't look at me like that. Now, what are these columns? What Steve Baird did again, because each county has to report to the state of California its budget every year. These are the amounts that the state or the counties of the state of California are reporting to the state of California. We're not making these numbers up. I'm going to give you an example in a moment. The next one are the K-12 numbers. When I first looked at this form and I said to Steve, Steve, you left out a column. He said, what do you mean? He said, you're not accounting for the K-12 numbers, the education numbers. Because even though the county is not directly responsible for paying those amounts, they get grants from the state and the federal government for education. The fact is that they have to run the money through their books. Does that make sense? Some of you are still living with your parents and they're giving you money every month. It runs through their books, okay? Or otherwise you would starve or move home, whatever, all right? So the key is that the K-12 numbers needed to be included, and I got Steve to put that column in. And then the equal sign, that is the column that shows if the county has a retained earnings, or what we call a profit. And then you'll see that there are some black numbers and there are some red ones. What do you want to guess the red means? They're behind. Let me tell you about Trinity County. We have a $107 million budget every year, of which $107 million, of which we only generate $14 million in county. Where do you suppose we get the other $90 million bucks? Federal and state grants. That's why when I went and talked to the Board of Supervisors, I said, you guys, we need to start taking our timber out so we have less fire hazard. We need to start mining the ground, which of course we can't do and the state won't let us, but the good news is the state isn't doing it either. So if they let us go away, it won't matter. They're not losing anything because they're not taking anything out of our forest or out of our ground. They're taking our water, but let me clear that one up. They have a contract. So I'm going to pretend that Dick owns a property and Fran wants to buy it. But I'm a tenant of Dick's. If I buy his property, I have to honor the contract or the leasing or rental agreement he has with Fran. You understand that? You know what the leasing or rental agreement is for the water in Northern California? It goes into perpetuity. It was negotiated mostly by Mulholland way back when he realized that if he didn't secure water for LA, they would never grow. So he bought up the water rights of all of Northern California, Mono Lake. He dug a ditch over to the Colorado River. The only thing that the Arizonans were smarter is that they put a ditch a little further north. Because when you get down to the Gulf of Mexico or the Sea of Baja, whatever they call it, there is no more water. But we don't own the water rights. Just like if I buy his property, I'm going to have to honor the agreement that he has with Fran. You understand that? So don't get all ticked off or pissed off about water rights. Water rights don't matter. We can maybe charge them for it, because we're not charging anything from Trinity County. You guys get all your water from Trinity County, pretty much, goes down to the Sacramento River, through Whiskeytown Lake, and then your water companies turn around and charge you, but they don't pay us a nickel. Now, so we have an issue. You shouldn't have an issue, because you're getting our water. So that's okay, we don't mind. You're welcome, all right. Now, if you come down here and you'll notice that these red numbers here, they added up. Look over here in this other column underneath the green line, it adds up to $771 million. One of the things the state of Jefferson wants to do is that they want to make sure that every county has every bill that they have paid and not wanting to change the status quo initially. So if the county, like our county, we have a great program for unwed mothers. It's really important that people get pregnant without being married and have children that we get to support socially. Okay, it's just an important thing. And so, you know, I know it's just the way it is, okay? You know, it's just the way it is. Well, anyway, we're not saying that the state of Jefferson is going to cut these people off initially. All we're saying is that we're going to make sure that they get every nickel for every program that they have, so that they don't feel like they're losing anything. Because when people feel like they're going to lose something, what happens? Their sphincter gets really tight. Is that clear? Some of you ladies understand that better than the men, okay? But, you know, that's the way that works. It just does, okay? But the state of Jefferson is going to pay that so that every county has no deficit. Year one. That's important. Because when you're talking to your board of supervisors, which I know are brain dead here in this county, and they won't even discuss the topic. Yeah, whatever. The whole point comes down that they're worried about losing their grants. And you say, we're not going to do that. We want to make sure you get everything you're now getting. Is there a problem with that? And if they say, well, let me think about it a minute. There isn't. If you take away the objection, that's what I am. I'm a professional salesman. If you take the objection away, why can't they do what you're recommending? Well, they're worried about other things. We'll get to that in a second. Okay, so this $771 million. Now, this is where it's going to get a little complicated. If you take $771 million and come all the way over here to $2.1 billion, actually this $2.1 billion should have been almost $3 billion, because these two numbers added together is about the budget that the state of Jefferson would have if they get their share. So they're not going to get any property tax. But if they give us 85% of the state tax, how much is the state of Jefferson going to keep? It's 85 from 100 is 15. And what about if we get 140% of the federal income tax and we also distribute 85% of that? How much is the state of Jefferson going to get? 15% of 140%. Are you with me so far? And then they're going to keep 66% of the sales tax, and they're going to keep about 50 cents on a dollar for the fuel tax. If you add all that up for all the counties, after we've paid all the counties to make sure they don't have any shortage in money, we still end up with $2.1 billion. $2.1 billion after all the county's expenses are paid. Now let me go on because it gets better. Right now, the state of California is reporting to us, go over here to the third or fourth column where it's blue and it says $340 billion. You see that? That's what the state of California is reporting that they owe. We know that it's about $460 billion. But we'll take the smaller number. If they're going to report a smaller number, we're not going to argue with them. Because you see, our population base is about 4.94%, which is about 5%. So just think 5%. If you take 5% of 340 billion, you get 16 billion. That would be the amount of money that technically, if we did it today, one of our arguments would be, well, you know, based on population, we should only have a responsibility to you of about $16 billion. Okay, you with me so far? And if we make a payment on that for the next 30 years, that payment works out to be about 500 and what? About $560 million. Now that's a lot of money. But if you're starting with 2.1 billion and you subtract 560 million, what do you end up with? You end up with 1.6 billion, which is down here. Are you with me so far? 1.6 billion after all the county's expenses are paid. Now, Steve is very brilliant. He went around the country and he looked at the demographics of the other states. And he ran across the state of New Mexico. And he measured the land area, which is comparable to what the state of Jefferson would be. And he also looked at their demographics, the kind of warm and fuzzy bodies they have, how many, you know, the population densities and so forth. But he also learned something else about the state of New Mexico. They only have 37 state agencies. Now, you've all been told how many state agencies California has. How many is that? 570 or so. Steve thinks we could save some money if we only had 37 state agencies. Does anybody think that makes sense? Is that complicated? Now, I've talked to him about which state agencies, and of course the list, you know, is subjective. He wants an office of management and budget. Somebody's going to have to watch the numbers. You know, but let's get rid of a couple things. Let's get rid of CHP. Let's get rid of Cal Fire. Let's get rid of Caltrans. Because a lot of the money for Caltrans especially comes from the federal government. So instead of the money coming to the state of California, have you ever heard of the mafia? And they do what we call skimming. You know, they go to a business and say, sir, if you want to operate, we just need 20% of your weekly revenue. That's all. It's no problem. And we'll protect you from ourselves. Yes, sir.
So on the state agencies, like for instance, Cal Fire.
Yeah.
How do we replace those services?
I thought you'd never ask. Because state employees, they also have this, it's an anal reaction. When you get into talking about changing something, especially if they're a union or, no, I'm not either, and we don't want to disc these people. But I was talking to the lieutenant commander of the CHP office in Weaverville a couple weeks ago and explaining how this works. And he says, even if we don't have a state police force, we have 11 units in Trinity County. Let me give you just a little background perspective. We have 5 deputies to patrol 2 million acres. We have 18 deputies that are in the jail because if there's not that many people supervising the inmates can sue us for lack of supervision. Are you with me so far?
California.
Is that a federal law or is that a state law?
That's the way it works with California now, based upon their shoveling out their inmates to the counties. Well, we can do everything that Terry will ever tell you about, okay? So just listen to Terry. Keep it simple, though. So, you know, if we have 11 units, and usually there's 1 or 2 officers per unit, 11 vehicles, and we get the money that the state of California is giving to the CHP officers in the office to operate, that would almost double the amount of money Sheriff Haney has in Trinity County. Because right now he's working on a budget of $4 million. So we don't need a state police. What we need is more money for the local sheriff. Let the sheriff, and these guys say, well, what happens to us? He says, well, we're probably going to have to negotiate with you what you want to be paid. And probably we can pay you what we think you deserve. And you'll decide whether you want to earn it or not. And that's your choice. What about my pension plan? Well, you're vested. If you're in CalPERS or STRS with the teachers group, you basically have a vested contract, which means if you retire today and move to Mexico or Poland, they would send you a check. Doesn't matter where you live, because you have that benefit. Well, what if I want to keep working? Well, the state of Jefferson is going to have to negotiate with you what kind of a pension or 401k or whatever new benefit you're going to get because you're a resident or employee of a new state. But that all has to go through the Constitutional Convention. I mean, we're discussing things we can't answer today. You understand? But we're going to need good police officers. And by the way, what I did in Trinity County was I sent a FOIA. Do you know what FOIA means? Freedom of Information Act. I sent it to CAL FIRE, Caltrans, and CHP. What do you think I was asking them?
How much they make?
Well, that's two, the money part. But I wanted to know, I want the VIN number of every vehicle in the county. I want to know the color of the vehicle. I want to know the make of the vehicle. I want to know what the mileage is. Why? Because when we assume our share of the debt, do you know what happens to everything that California owns in the state of Jefferson? It immediately becomes the property of the state of Jefferson. We don't have a capital outlay. We don't have to worry about building a Caltrans office or yard. We don't have to worry about buying their loaders or their graders or their trucks because we got it. It belongs to us. We just don't want it moving south when we're in negotiation and then them moving other stuff that maybe is older up north. They wouldn't do that, I'm sure. Okay. You guys are really cynical, I can tell. All right, that's about it. That's about as hard as it is. Do you understand the columns now? Okay, if you don't, we put it in baby language on the back. Just turn it over, and when you go home tonight, you can read it. Everything I just said is summarized in Steve Baird's, which is better and cleaner English than mine, okay?